folks, it's Jeff here. Just a quick reminder, if you're loving Disney Coast to Coast, there are a couple of easy ways that you can support the show. We'd love it if you could rate and review us on iTunes, or wherever you listen to the show. This is a simple way to help other Disney fans find us. Also, go ahead and share your favorite episodes on social media and be sure to tag us. You can find all of our social media information at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. And finally, I just want to say thank you to all of you who listen every week. Your support is very appreciated, and we love that you're enjoying our Disney geekiness. Now on with the show.
Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePaoli, and on today's show, I have for you part 2 of my interview with Disney legend Floyd Norman. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I suggest you hit pause here and go back to episode 647 to hear the beginning of this interview. In part 2 today, we'll continue our conversation about Floyd's work at the Walt Disney Animation Studios and his involvement with a little unrealized film called Who Discovered Roger Rabbit. Let's jump to that conversation right now. You know, you've come and gone from the Walt Disney Company sometimes by choice, then there's the infamous stories of getting fired and such, but I am kind of curious. You left after Jungle Book, which was, correct me if I'm wrong, the feature, the first animated feature after Walt's death, correct?
Yeah, well, it was the last feature film that Walt worked with us, intimately, personally on that film. He had seen a little bit of Aristocats, but really did not contribute much to that film because by that time his health was failing and he wasn't able to do much on Aristocats. But his last film, where he stayed with us throughout the production from start to finish, was The Jungle Book. And we wrapped up story on The Jungle Book probably late November of 1966. By December 66, Walt was gone.
Okay.
That's how fast it happened.
So was that part of the reason you decided to leave? Were you just feeling, I mean, you, once again, you see the future, apparently. So were you seeing, there's changes are coming and I don't want to be here for it? It
wasn't that I was against changes. It was just that I think with the passing of Walt Disney, if Walt had still been alive, I probably wouldn't have left, But with the passing of Walt Disney, it just felt like it was time to leave, time to move on. And sometimes you feel like you look at your life and your life is like chapters in a book. I felt with the passing of Walt Disney, the completion of The Jungle Book, the page had been turned and a new chapter in my life had begun. So for me, it was the perfect time to leave the Disney studio and begin another chapter in my career.
Was that the HannaBarbera chapter? Or?
No, this was the Vignette Films chapter.
Oh, Vignette Films, okay.
Yeah, it was our own company. We had launched our own company, Vignette Films Incorporated, to do whatever we could do. Because we were willing to do anything. We just wanted to make movies. Yeah. Educational films, government films, training films, corporate films, film, TV titles, anything, mishmash of stuff that we just wanted to create.
Now, you did eventually return to Disney for Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. You had already done Mary Poppins. I am curious, what's it work? Is it much different working in that style of animation in live action? Is that a whole other learning curve?
No, not really. Keep in mind that all of the compositing in Mary Poppins and in Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, that was all optical composites. Mm-hmm. We didn't have the digital technology. So working on Bed Knobs, and basically that's how I got back to Disney. Well, what happened was my wife had just had twin daughters, and so I was working at home because I needed to be with my family because, having twins was a pretty big deal. Mm-hmm. I got a call from the Walt Disney Studio during that time saying, we know your wife has just given birth to twins, and would you be willing to help us out on this feature we're doing called Bed Knobs and Broomsticks? And you could work at home because we know that it's going to be difficult to leave. And I said, well, sure, I appreciate the opportunity. So I would go into Disney, pick up my work and bring it back home and work at home where I could be around my wife and my daughters. So that worked out so well. Disney then said that, hey, our next feature film we're planning is Robin Hood. After finishing Bedknobs, you think you'd like to stick around and work on Robin Hood? And I thought, you know what? I've always wanted to animate on a Disney film, and I've never had the opportunity to animate. The reason I stuck around to work on Robin Hood was I wanted to animate, and I did. Thankfully, I did get a chance to animate on a Disney feature. Now, I didn't do it in an official animator's capacity because I had not been given the title of animator. So I was not officially a Disney animator, which is why I don't have a screen credit and any of that stuff. But I did get to animate Robin Hood. So which means my dream came true. I got to animate on a Disney feature film. And that was cool.
That was cool.
I had fulfilled that dream of mine, and then I went back to doing writing and story after that.
There's 2 questions about Robin Hood.
Okay.
Number one, so now it's kind of infamous, this whole comparison of the dance scene in Robin Hood to the scene in Snow White.
Right.
Do you know what was going on there?
Oh, yeah.
Was it just...
I know what's going on. Wooly, it was our director.
Yeah.
Wolfgang Reiteman was our director. Wooly, for some reason, and this was Wooly's big mistake, was not looking ahead and thinking about technology. He knew by cribbing these scenes from the Disney library, reusing animation, that who's going to notice?
Well, who's in the 21st century with YouTube.
who's going to see the earlier film and compare it to the later film? Because there's no technology to allow you to do that. Well, one day that technology would exist, and people could reach back and say, hey, wait a minute, that scene in this film and that scene in the new film, that's the same animation, and you could compare, put them side by side, and you could see all of the. Now, here's the thing: the irony was we didn't want to do this. We wanted to just animate the stuff fresh. We didn't want to go back and reuse old stuff. But Wooly said, "Oh no, go back and use the old stuff. Who's going to notice?
Time and money, right?
Time and money. Who's going to notice?"
That's unbelievable. And the other thing with...
And now it's just embarrassing when you see this stuff. Because it makes Disney look cheap.
Yeah. Well, but it's at a time when they kind of were, right?
Well, honestly, I don't think it saved them a dime. It was such a hassle to go back and get this old footage and bring it back, and then you have to do it to reuse it. It would have been easier to just sit down and animate the scene from scratch. It would have been just easier to just animate it. Just redo it, do something different, fresh, unique. Not go back and reuse stuff. It's just, this is Disney, not a bargain basement studio. We're not like saving nickels and dimes here.
That's so funny.
So thank you, Wooly Reiteman. I mean, I love Wooly. I mean, he was a great boss. He was a great director. I mean, Wooly was the first director that I worked for. He directed The Jungle Book. So I worked for Wooly, and he's a great guy, and I love him. But Wooly's insistent on using this old stuff, reusing it. It's just today. It's just like, oh man, it's so embarrassing.
It's nice to hear though that the animators were frustrated by it.
Yeah, we didn't like it either.
Okay, cool.
We didn't like it.
The other thing is you were fired from Robin Hood?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, and I love how people can sometimes they want to make a great story out of this.
Let's make it a dull one.
Yeah, it's really a dull story. It has nothing to do with personal animus. It has nothing to do with good guys and bad guys. It had to do with finances. What happened at Disney in the 1970s, and they were trying to cut corners. Animations was costing a lot of money. They were trying to find ways of cutting costs. Now, one way of cutting costs in animated film production was replace older workers who are paid more with younger workers who are paid less.
Very familiar. Still happens.
Yeah,
yes.
It still happens. So the thing was, I got called in by my boss and ostensibly over my footage count. We had these footage counts where every week they would tally up your footage to see how you were doing footage-wise, how much work you were doing. A lot of times these things didn't make any sense at all because a lot of times if your scene is put on once by the director, that means twice as many drawings. It's going to take twice as long to do. I'd be called in and they'd say, hey, your footage count was low this week. It was way down. And I'd say, yeah, look, but the director decided to put the scene on ones. I had to go back and redo it. Took twice as long. That's why my footage is so far behind. I mean, there were always reasons for it. You know, we weren't just goofing off. Mm-hmm. But I knew this wasn't the real reason anyway. They were looking to replace older workers with younger workers. And I'd known some older guys who had been called in and said, hey, Charlie, it's about time, you know, aren't you thinking about retirement? You've been with the company a lot of years. Don't you want to kind of call it quits and go enjoy your life, you know, go travel or whatever? So I saw a lot of old guys departing Disney. And then young students right out of art school would come in and take their place. Well, these young students were naturally paid a whole lot less money.
Yeah.
So when I got called in, ostensibly about my low footage count, I knew it wasn't about my footage. Oh, come on, give me a break. I'd been in the business for enough years to know it's not about my footage, it's not about the quality of my work. It wasn't that I suddenly no longer qualified to be a Disney artist because I wasn't good enough. I'd been with the studio for at that time like over 20 years, 25 years or more. And they said, oh, your footage count is low. You're going to have to pick up the speed or we're going to have to let you go, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, to prove my point, I did pick up my speed and they let me go anyway. And that's because the whole plan the whole time was to let me go because they wanted to replace me with a younger guy. And guess what they did? When I got let go, a young kid was hired to take my place who probably made half what they were paying me. And really, that was the reason for all of this. They should have just come out and said, but I guess they can't. I guess business guys can't be honest.
Yeah.
They can't come out and say, hey, we're going to replace you with a guy who
worked for half the salary.
Who worked for half of what you're getting. I would have said, hey, smart move. I would have done the same thing.
So that was kind of the first time they did that to you.
Yeah.
And this is when you went to HannaBarbera?
I went to HannaBarbera.
Okay.
Ironically, making twice as much money. That's what's so hilarious about the story. They didn't really punish me by letting me go.
That's amazing.
They just increased my salary.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, HannaBarbera, totally different style.
Totally different.
First of all, I'm a huge Flintstones fan. Did you work on anything Flintstones?
I did indeed.
You did Flintstone Christmas Carol, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've done so much stuff in HannaBarbera, I honestly cannot remember all the stuff I did. I can remember the first show I worked on because, you know, it was the first show, and that was Josie and the Pussycats. That I worked with Willie Ito, who's a good friend of mine who has worked both at Disney and HannaBarbera. So I remember working with Willie on Josie and the Pussycats. And, of course, I worked on great shows like Johnny Quest. I worked on the Flintstones and so many shows. Oh, good heavens, Scooby-Doo. Can't leave out Scooby-Doo.
Did you draw Fred? Like Fred Flintstone?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I drew. Oh, yeah, Fred and Barney.
Oh, gosh.
Wilma, Betty.
That's incredible to me.
Oh, yeah.
So you drew like my favorite characters. You drew Fred Flintstone, and then later in life, you became like the Mickey Mouse artist for the comic strips and publishing and such, right?
Yeah, that was, once again, another job that I didn't want.
Really?
The Mickey Mouse job came about.
Did you end up loving it?
No, I never did.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I loved Mickey, but I didn't love the job. What happened was Floyd Gottfredson, who was the original Mickey Mouse artist, had retired. He was replaced by Del Cannell, another talented Disney writer who did Mickey for a number of years. And then Del wanted to retire. This was in the 1980s, and I was working at Disney Publishing at that time, which was kind of, again, another weird job where I came back to Disney. They called me and said, would you come back? And I said, hey, you fired me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but we want you back anyway. Yeah, but you fired me. Yeah, but we love you now. Come back. So anyway, I came back to Disney, and then one day my boss calls me up to his office and he said, we want you to write the Mickey Mouse comic strip, the daily Mickey Mouse comic strip for King Features Syndicate. And I said, I don't want that job. I don't want to write Mickey Mouse. And he says, well, my boss said, I don't have anybody else, so I guess you're going to have to do it. So that's how I got the job, by not asking for it by not wanting it.
It's as if Walt was still there, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Only you weren't as willing to just be like, all
Once
right.
again, a job that I didn't want, and the job is dropped in my lap. The only reason I got out of that job was because by the early 90s, King Feature Syndicate, the contract between the Walt Disney Company and King Feature Syndicate came to an end, and King Feature decided not to renew the contract, which was great because it basically got me fired. Sort of. I didn't really get fired, but I no longer had to write Mickey Mouse because the comic strip ended. So what did happen was I went on to do other things in the publishing department, book ideas and write books. And a lot of cool jobs was I got a chance to do these comic adaptations of the Disney feature films. That was kind of fun to do. I did Pocahontas and Hunchback and Lion King.
Hunchback you wrote on as well, right? The film?
Oh, yeah.
Story?
I worked in story on the Hunchback.
One of the most
Notre Dame.
underrated Walt Disney animation features. Love Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Thank you for saying that. That was the reason why I wanted on the film, was because I thought, what a challenge to do Victor Hugo in animation.
Oh, unbelievable.
What a challenge.
I assume you've seen the musical?
No, I have not.
You didn't see it?
I have
Oh,
not seen
gosh,
it.
it was unbelievable.
Well, I'll see it.
You'll see it eventually.
I'll see it.
Hopefully somebody will do it
one of
again.
these days.
Yeah. But Hunchback of Notre Dame blows my mind. Even as a kid, I remember seeing it and being like, wow, this is dark, but I love every second of it.
Well, it was a challenge. There was something, and I think animation should always be willing to take a challenge. When I heard that Gary Trousdale and Kirk Wise, two guys that I knew, were going to be doing Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame, I said, I got to work in this movie. Got to do it because of this idea. This is crazy, but I got to do it. So I literally left my office because I was over in Burbank at the time, and I drove over to Glendale where animation was headquartered. And
So you've also done all the animation buildings. Not only have you been through this tech, you've done Walt Disney Studio lot animation, you've done the Glendale trailer animation, and you've done the Roy E. Disney animation building. You've
done Roy E. Disney, I've done the Tower building in Burbank,
my
the
gosh.
Disney Channel building in Burbank. Just bounced around all over the place. So I drove over to Glendale to talk to Gary Trousdale. I said, Gary, I hear you and Kirk are your next project is a Hunchback of Notre Dame. I said, that's a crazy idea. I said, I want to work on your movie. I said, this is insane. I want to work in this movie because this is awesome. So I got a chance to work on the Hunchback of Notre Dame with Kirk and Gary and Don Hahn, my producer, Don Hahn, Roy Conley. And then followed that film with Mulan. Mm-hmm. We largely did production at our studio down in Orlando, Florida.
Did you move there for that?
No, I didn't have to because pretty much all of the story work was done here in Burbank.
Okay.
Or Burbank, Glendale. Yeah, both towns. We started out in Glendale, then eventually moved to Burbank, and worked on that. And then I bounced off of Mulan after I finished my assignment and went on to a film called Dinosaur.
Oh,
So I left Burbank and moved back to Glendale, back and forth, back and forth. So I worked on Dinosaur. And Dinosaur was going to be followed by a film that we never did. Who Discovered Roger Rabbit?
Oh, man, you were going to work on that?
I was working on it. I was on it.
Tell us everything about it.
Oh, man.
How far in the process was it?
We had a script.
Wow.
A script that it was so secret that I was not allowed to even maintain a copy. It was like top secret. It was like Pentagon Papers.
And it was Zemeckis involved?
Zemeckis was not involved.
Okay.
Zemeckis did not want to be involved. He said, "Look, I've done the first one. I don't want to do the sequel thing." So we were shopping around for a new director. I remember the names that came up. I remember one of the guys who came up was Sidney Pollack.
Wow.
Sadly, he's passed on, but the late Sidney Pollack's name came up. But we had a script. Jim Pentecost was the animation producer. And I was working for Jim, and I was doing early development work on Roger. The story was going to start out in New York, and it was going to be Roger's story, how he got from back east to Hollywood. And he had a partner. At the time, you didn't know that Roger had a partner. Yeah, he had worked with his partner back in New York, but Roger decided when the act broke up to come to Hollywood on his own.
This is so like vaudeville, Laurel and Hardy kind of stuff. That's
And
great.
we wanted for Roger's partner a guy we thought would just be perfect for animation, a guy who looks animated himself. Jim Carrey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we wanted Jim Carrey to play Roger's partner because Jim Carrey's already a cartoon character.
Yeah.
So, and so I remember we had this meeting on the third floor of the animation building. We're going to have this meeting with Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg was busy arguing with Michael Eisner. Surprise, surprise.
Over the rights of Roger.
Oh, yeah,
and all
it was
stuff,
this whole thing. Anyway, Frank Marshall, Kathleen Kennedy, who were two of Steven Spielberg's lieutenants, they came over, and we had this big meeting on the third floor of the animation building while Steven Spielberg and Michael Eisner argued over who owned what.
Man,
yeah, Hollywood, big-time Hollywood battles. Anyway, no agreement was reached, and I knew that the whole Roger Rabbit thing was probably going to implode. And so I began to look around, what can I do next? Well, fortunately, I already had a project on my drawing board, something to do next, and it was the sequel to Toy Story 2. And I began working on Toy Story 2, even as I was working on Who Discovered Roger Rabbit. By the time Roger Rabbit, the whole deal just blew up and it was gone. Now, no movie, no Zemeckis, no Spielberg, it was all gone. I just packed my bags and moved up north to Pixar, where I continued my work on Toy Story 2. And the rest is history.
Wow. Now's the time, I feel like, for a Roger Rabbit sequel. I feel like it could work.
We got a script.
You got a script. I feel like
we got a lot of production design. We got everything that we need to do it.
And Disney
and we can still get Jim Carrey.
And Disney owns so much now that it's like you could work in Pixar characters and the Disney characters. I mean, I always hear the glue with that was the fact that Spielberg had such great relationships with all the different studios.
Well, that too, and also, and of course, the negative was Spielberg and Michael Eisner apparently didn't get along.
Yeah.
With Bob Iger in charge, and who's more of a guy who's willing to make a deal and willing to work with people, I'll bet Bob Iger could get Spielberg back on board.
Yeah.
And say, hey, let's do this long-awaited sequel, or actually it would be a prequel because it's before the prequel, Who Discovered Roger Rabbit.
Now's the time.
I
really, really think so. In any case, let's fast forward to the infamous year, I think it was 2000, when at age 6, you were about to turn age 65.
Yeah.
You're let go from Disney again.
Right, let go again.
At this time, what were you working on at this point?
At this time, I was working on another feature animated film that you'll never see because even though we had been on it for at least 2 years or more, a film called Wildlife, CGI, a very interesting, to say the least, very interesting project that dealt with club kids and the whole club scene, nightlife. Doesn't sound much like a Disney film, but I guess that's why we never made it.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound much like a Walt Disney film. But anyway, it was a very exciting project, and I saw finished footage. I saw scenes from the film, scenes that had gone all the way into animation, full CGI. The film looked fantastic. It looked gorgeous. It looked amazing. Trouble was, story was just inappropriate for families. Mm. They could never have sold that film under the banner of Walt Disney Pictures. Or now they just call it Disney.
Yeah.
I guess the brand is just...
Don't even get me going on that.
Yeah, don't even get me going on Disney.
It's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw that.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was 2011, and it was that Muppet movie with Jason. You remember the...
Oh, yeah, I do.
And I remember, I think it was like around Thanksgiving. It was November, if I'm remembering correctly. And I'm sitting in the theater, and I see the castle show up.
Yeah.
And it just says Disney.
And
I went... What the hell? I literally said it out loud in the theater.
Yeah.
And the friends I'm with are like, what's wrong? I'm like, what happened to Walt Disney Pictures?
Yeah.
That's a whole.
Well, before,
other thing.
it was, in the old days, it was Walt Disney Presents.
Yeah.
And that was cool. Walt was with us.
Yeah.
After Walt's passing, it became Walt Disney Pictures Presents. And that's fine because it is Walt Disney Pictures. And then they finally decided, Walt's gone. We don't need Walt. Who's Walt? And it's just Disney. Now Disney's just a brand. My friend Don Doherty and I often joke that one day the company will be called Dizco. Just D-I-Z-C-O.
You're killing me.
Dizco.
So in any case, around 2000, they let you go around the age of 65. Your belief is it was an ageism thing. I am curious, has anybody at the company ever admitted to that?
Oh, no, they won't admit to it. They can't admit to it because of litigation.
Yeah.
And but it's a common practice, not just with Disney, but with any corporation.
Sure.
It's just a matter of swapping out older workers for younger workers.
Yet they keep bringing you back. Like this morning, you came.
Well, yeah, they sort of bringing me. I mean, I'm not on the payroll.
But you
I
get
still
brought
do.
in, you did a 101 Dalmatians thing for the DVD.
Oh, yeah.
This morning you were coming from Disney TV or something.
Mm-hmm.
Was that, I assume, about a business meeting? There's always little projects you're working on.
Oh, yeah. And that's great. And I'm happy to be, to have this relationship with the Disney company, and I've done any number of jobs for them, from things like the Dalmatian animation that we did for the Blu-ray DVD, the things like that little kind of sort of a commercial thing I did for Disney Parks and Resorts last year. Things like books, like the marvelous book I did with Richard Sherman.
Kiss Goodnight. Yeah.
Kiss Goodnight, that tells why there's a fireworks show at Disneyland. So these marvelous little projects that keep me connected to Disney, even though I'm not an employee of the company. I still maintain what I would like to say is a great relationship with Disney, and I recognize that times change, business is business, and I don't take it personally that that I left the company because I'd just been there too many years. One can say, why should there have to be a limit to how many years you could work at a company? But that's just the way corporations work today, and that's just a reality. Older workers are replaced by younger workers. And, even though I might disagree with that idea, because I think older workers have value, younger workers have value as well. What's wrong with having both?
Yeah.
What's wrong with having the originality and freshness of youth, along with the experience of older guys and women who have been down the road a few times? That gives a company a lot of depth,
I mean, you trained under the 9 old men. How old were they at that point when you were training with them?
They were probably, most were probably in their 50s or 60s.
Okay.
And
they stayed a while beyond
They
that.
stayed a while. Most probably retired when they were in their 70s.
Okay.
A few might have stayed longer.
They just saw your future as being, he's never going to retire. But then in 2007, you get honored with the Disney Legend Award. Very curious, were you just shocked at that point, considering that you kind of up and down, and you have this reputation of being the bad boy and really saying what you think. In fact, I think after you were fired, you sent a letter to some of the execs, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, but it was, once again, the same way I sent the book to Michael Eisner. It's all in fun.
Yeah.
I made up a little newsletter that sort of told a story of why I had been let go from the Disney company. And that it was mainly because I was just a troublemaker and a womanizer and just trouble. And the whole idea was, to show my bosses that there was no ill will.
Yeah.
That I was leaving the Disney company, not angrily, not bitter, but just moving on because, the time had come to turn another chapter in my life. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think, because of that attitude, why I retained such a good relationship with the Walt Disney company today. Because we've never been enemies. We've always worked together, and hopefully we'll work together in the future.
Yeah.
And even though I'm no longer a full-time employee, that's okay, because I think the Disney company is still a great company. It's got a fantastic legacy. It's given so much to me in my life. The benefits I've gained from the amazing people, and I do say amazing people that I work with at Disney, and some that I still see today, like Richard Sherman. And Dick.
How's he doing?
He's doing well.
The day we're recording is actually his 91st birthday.
Richard's doing well. I see him and his wife, Elizabeth, from time to time. I've had the opportunity to speak with Julie Andrews. We don't see much because Julie tends to be very private these days. Dick Van Dyke. I see him on a fairly regular basis. The young woman who played Jane Banks in Mary Poppins, Karen Dautrice. I still hang out with Karen, even though I met her when she was like 8 years old.
Yeah.
Back on Mary Poppins. All of these people are just wonderful old friends, and we've all shared this incredible legacy of Disney. We've all done great work together. We've all had lives that a lot of people envy because it has been so much fun. We've been lucky to have had a job that brought so much joy to others, but brought us so much joy as well. We've been really fortunate people to have been able to spend time with this incredible man named Walt Disney.
Yeah, and you actually did spend time with Walt Disney, so I'm going to wrap this interview up.
I did indeed, yeah.
I'm going to wrap this up with, there's so many books, documentaries, stories about Walt Disney, and we kind of touched on this a little earlier. I actually hadn't heard the story about the whole ink and paint thing and the women, but I'm curious, is there another story where you feel like is Walt Disney the person is just completely misrepresented?
Oh, all the time.
What's like the biggest one that you're just like, this is ridiculous? I knew
Walt
this
Disney,
man.
Yeah, it's a shame, but I think sadly it's what happens when people pass on, and they have just people out there who are bitter, angry for some reason, and they love spreading lies about people. And I think the three big lies about Walt Disney was, number one, he didn't like women. He was a gender bigot. He restricted women to the ink and paint department because he did not see them as good as men, worthy of having jobs that the men had, and kept women out of the animation department because all they could do was ink and paint. So that he created this women's ghetto in the ink and paint department. Well, that was not true, not at all. Walt gave opportunities to everybody, and that included women. One of my first bosses that I worked for when I came to Disney was a woman named Phyllis Harrell. Phyllis ran the commercial division of Walt Disney's studio. She was in charge of the TV commercials. And if you remember those commercials way back then, I Panda toothpaste and Nash motor cars, American Motors, and Peter Pan peanut butter. That department, that commercial division that made a lot of money for Disney, was run by a woman. Not by a man, but by a woman. Walt was been accused of being an anti-Semite. Didn't like Jews. Always talked badly about Jews. The Walt Disney Studios was filled with Jewish writers, songwriters, artists, musicians. He loved the Sherman Brothers. They're Jewish. So that throws that argument out the window. Walt Disney was racist. Didn't like minorities, didn't like black people, didn't like... So another lie. Walt Disney gave me probably the biggest opportunity in my career. And my skin is not white. Tyrus Wong, who did marvelous work on Bambi, was a Chinese American. Tyrus came to America from China. And Walt Disney gave Tyrus Wong the opportunity to do this gorgeous work and that people still regard today as some of the finest art direction in a Disney film, on the film Bambi, the work of Tyrus Wong. And I could go on and list, Arab Americans and Asian Americans and black artists. Walt Disney was none of the things he's accused of. And so it's sad that even today I have to continually defend Walt Disney because he's accused of things that he was not guilty of.
Yeah.
He was a tough boss, no doubt about it. Walt was demanding and he was tough. He didn't fool around. But having said that, he was one of the best bosses I ever worked for because even though he was tough and demanding, he was fair. He was a good man, not a perfect man, not by any means. And he would tell you that. He was not a perfect man, but he was a good man. And boy, we sure miss him today.
Yeah, was it always, your relationship with him was always as boss, or did it ever get anything more friendly than that?
No.
It was always the
I
boss.
have to remind people, they
You were
often,
young.
They talk about, did you ever hang out with Walt Disney? I said, look, I was a kid.
Yeah.
It'd be like hanging out with my grandparents.
Yeah.
Walt was a gentleman who, I was in my 20s when I was working on the Jungle Book, and Walt was in his 60s.
Wow.
So he was an older guy. So, we had nothing in common. He was just my boss.
Yeah.
So no, we didn't have a beer together. We didn't hang out together. No, because, it was a huge age difference.
When you hear his name, what's the first visual that comes to mind? Is it, I'm going to assume, has the corporate Walt Disney taken over your mind, or is it still that guy I used to see at work?
What's so great about Walt Disney was, and because I've had the opportunity to visit his hometown of Kansas City, Missouri, had the opportunity to visit 3 times Marceline, Missouri.
Oh, Marceline's great.
I've had a chance, in a sense, sort of walk in his footsteps. And what I think about when I hear the name Walt Disney, I think about incredible optimism. If there's one thing that Walt Disney personifies, it's that anybody who dreams big enough and works hard enough can make it. Now, that sounds kind of simplistic, but Walt really believed that. He believed that dream. He really believed it didn't matter who you are, what you were, that if you dreamed big and you worked hard, success was yours. And that's what I think of when I think of Walt Disney, the incredible optimist, the visionary who saw good everywhere. He saw what the world could be. He saw the good people could do. And that incredible optimism is what I think of when I think of Walt Disney. He inspired me. Even though he's been gone many years, I think he still inspires people today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
it hasn't diminished. Walt Disney is still an inspiration.
Do you think that would shock him? I mean, because
probably.
he was hugely famous by the time he passed away.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's been a good number of years at this point.
If there was anybody who deserved to have a bloated ego, it was Walt Disney.
Yeah.
If there was anybody who
Did he have a bloated ego?
No, indeed. He did not. He did not. But if there was anybody who could feel full of himself, who thought he was hot stuff, it would have been Walt Disney. And yet he was the kindest, generous, the kind of guy who would talk to anybody.
Yeah.
You didn't have to be a big shot politician or the head of a corporation. You could be a nobody. But Walt would talk to you because he regarded you as a human being, as a person. And that's very special when you see that in rich and powerful and famous men, when they can get down on one knee and talk to a child, one-on-one, face-to-face, and realize they're no better than anybody else. That's Walt Disney. He's what every man should be.
Yeah.
Really. He's what every big, important, and famous man or woman is what they should be. He's the example. He's the perfect example of the kind of person you should be if you're a decent human being.
It's wonderful. We're going to end it there. Floyd, thank you so much for coming on.
It's been my pleasure.
I know you do a ton of these interviews.
Yes, I do.
I hope that this one was somewhat enjoyable for you.
It always is.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
I hope you all enjoyed part 2 of my exclusive interview with Floyd Norman. I'd like to take a moment to thank Floyd for taking the time to sit down and share his stories with me. If you've enjoyed these 2 episodes with Floyd, it would mean a lot to me if you could take a moment right now, as soon as this episode ends, to head over to your iTunes podcast app, click on Write a Review, and to leave a 5-star rating and review for Disney Coast to Coast. This little gesture truly helps the show a lot and helps other Disney fans find the show. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePauli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.